And you already know our guest preacher for this Shabbat, Rabbi Bill Tepper, so I'll give you a couple of highlights about him, some of which you may or may not know. So one is that he was ordained from the Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 2008. He was a teacher before then. And he then was serving for 8 years as the rabbi of Mitzpeh congregation in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then for a few years in Winnipeg, and now he serves congregation Ir HaMelech in Kingston on commute basis for both these congregations. And now his main role within our Toronto Reform community is as our lead teacher for our IJL, our Introduction to Jewish Living course, a prerequisite for anybody seeking conversion or if they want to raise a Jewish family. And as well as that makes him the convener of our Toronto Reform Jewish Beit Din. So maybe some of you may have heard from him in different capacities. He also takes on many other roles within our community, for example, guest preaching and teaching like he has done today. And a fun fact that I only found out yesterday as I was making sure we had all of our notes was that he is an avid collector of typewriters. So if you have an old typewriter, he's the right person to call. I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so we look forward. The most important thing to know is that he is a scholar and a mensch, and we are just so lucky to be learning from him and with him this Shabbat. So come and enlighten us. Thank you so much, Rabbi Tepper.
Thank you, Rabbi McCarroll, for the beautiful welcome. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom again, everyone. In the Bible's first book of Samuel, Jonathan, grieving the torment suffered by David, his soulmate and future monarch of Israel, at the hands of Jonathan's jealous and spiteful father, King Saul, says, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and your, that is, David's, absence will be marked, because your place at our table will be vacant. For God is witness between you and me for all time." David will live on for several more decades, but Jonathan's words of longing befit how David would be remembered. I remember when the young and hopeful President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The catastrophic deaths of visionaries Senator Robert Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and all his unfinished tasks, as well, of course, Queen Elizabeth II, the only English monarch many of us ever knew. And I'm remiss if I don't include Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Canada's leader of my formative years, and who, according to one journalist, made us care about politics and care more for our country. And most recently, President Jimmy Carter, who acquired more esteem following his term of office than while he occupied it. The Kennedys, King, Rabin, Trudeau, Carter, the Queen, all in their own ways, sources of inspiration and catalysts for social, cultural, and political transformation, all who made a difference in the lives of others, and all because they were human beings complicated and imperfect. I'm thinking about these persons and others as I reflect on the scriptural text associated with this Shabbat, Vayechi, meaning from the Hebrew, and one lived. In Genesis chapter 49, Jacob says to his sons, I'm about to accompany my ancestors, bury me with them in the cave of Machpelah in Canaan that Abraham bought as a burial site. There Abraham and Sarah were buried. There Isaac and Rebekah were buried. There I buried Leah. The field and the cave bought from the Hittites. Jacob finished his instructions, took his final breath, and was gathered to his ancestors. And in our Haftarah from the first book of Kings, when David's life drew to a close, he instructed his son Solomon, I am going the way of all the earth. You will be the one in charge if you act with determination. God will fulfill the promise of my descendants if my descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and faithful with heart and soul. Your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. David then slept with his ancestors. In the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan maintains Jacob did not die, even if Torah relates that he was mourned, embalmed, and buried. The commentators on the text understand Rabbi Yochanan's remark to imply that Jacob lived on spiritually through the devotion of his descendants. And who, among all of us here, will not admit with pride that those she or he loved remain forever in his hearts? The Interpreter's Bible posits a view that well defines both Jacob and David, not to overlook all other leaders who follow them through the course of human history. In the long run, the permanence of a nation will depend on the quality of its heroes. Does a nation exalt only those of glittering so-called success, its creators of material wealth, its military leaders who by any means necessary have won their victories? Or does something deep within a nation's soul acknowledge a greater inheritance? With lesser ideals, a nation may seize for herself many temporary benefits, but on no lower terms can a nation win the lasting greatness which depends upon the blessings of God. As well as we pursue the theme of memory, my colleague, Rabbi Fred Davidow in Havertown, Pennsylvania, writes, whenever I walk through a Jewish cemetery of my hometown, I feel what it means to be gathered to one's people. For there lie the graves of 42 kinfolk. Instead of pangs of grief, there is the sweet joy in the memories of lives well lived and the prospect of lives still to come. So how then might Jacob and David, two of the most significant figures in all of Jewish and human history, be remembered? Jacob used to his advantage the physical and emotional needs of his brother Esau. Jacob, with his mother Rebekah, used to his advantage the physical, emotional, and spiritual shortcomings of his father Isaac. Jacob struggled with loving his wives Leah and Rachel. Jacob struggled with his manipulative father-in-law Laban. Jacob struggled in his love and caring for his 12 sons and 1 daughter. And owing to the new name assigned to him by the divine, Israel, Jacob struggled with God. But thanks to that new name and the deathbed blessings for strength, wisdom, resilience, and devotion to the one God that Jacob gifted to his son Judah, Jacob is the ancestor of a people, while it is because of Judah that you and I are the Jews. David remains as complex a human being as there ever was. Complicated relationships with his father and brothers, with his political and military rivals, in particular King Saul, with his advisors, in particular the prophet Nathan, being much married, complicated relationships with women and his numerous offspring, and a complex relationship with Jonathan. But David loved God. David loved the people in his care. And as the rabbis of antiquity remind us, David, like me, an early riser, loved Torah. And David loved, as you and I do to this day, the city he made his nation's capital, Jerusalem. Rabbi Plaut, in his Haftarah commentary, points out the heroes of the Tanakh, that is, the Hebrew Bible, are not depicted as saints. They are flesh and blood human beings who have great qualities and are poets, prophets, and intimates of God, but they remain and exhibit weaknesses that are often glaring. How then should we remember Jacob and David and other leaders who, for better or for worse, aspired to make a difference in the lives of those who looked to them as exemplars, and at the end of the day left their nations and humankind in her entirety in a better place? On a more immediate level, how should we remember all whom we once loved, cared for, and who loved and cared for us in return? Were they honest, trusting, and trustworthy? Did they answer the bell when needed, and even when they weren't? Did they aim for the ethical high ground and even raise that ethical bar? Did they put the well-being of others before themselves? Did they value and model lifelong learning? Did they perpetuate a global view of the world? Were they embodiments of empathy and kindness? Did they understand and demonstrate the meaning of kavod, that is, respect? Did they assume responsibility for their behavior and not abdicate it? Did they speak little and listen a lot? Did they facilitate inclusion and accessibility? Did they generate the building of bridges rather than walls? Did they live the values they preached? Were their welcome mats in tidy condition and at all times prominently displayed? And were their minds, hearts, and spirits open at all times? If what I'm sharing about Jacob, David, and everyone we strive to remember sounds like words from a chesed, that is, a eulogy, you're not incorrect. After all, it's no coincidence, because there never is one, that both Parshat Vayechi and one lived, and the earlier Parshat Chaya Sarah and Sarah lived are as much about lives and how we recall those lives as they are about the deaths of Jacob and Sarah, respectively. Perhaps even more so. The great Torah commentator Ramban, also known as Nachmanides, wrote a letter that he asked his son to read once a week, a document not unlike what we might call today an ethical well. Included was the following advice: be accustomed always to speak calmly to everyone at all times. Thus you will be saved from anger, a terrible attribute that causes us to make the gravest of mistakes. With calm, not anger. With love, not contempt. With kindness, not indifference. With hope, not despair. Seeing their faces, hearing their voices, feeling their arms around us and our arms around them. In the best of possible worlds, this is how we remember. Ken Yehiratzon, may it be God's will.